I'm going to explain liquid democracy. This is a political system that is halfway between a direct democracy and a representative democracy like we live in at the moment in the United States. Direct democracy is where every citizen of a country shows up for every vote about what the government is going to do. And this is not really practical in the modern day world when we have a lot of topics that need to be voted on, a lot of things that people would need to research to have informed votes on so many things. So what we do at the moment is we elect someone to make those decisions for us, to do the research for us, and we trust them. The idea with a liquid democracy is that every citizen has a right to show up to every vote, kind of like you could show up on the floor of Congress anytime they were voting on anything. And there isn't any general election. However, you are allowed to allocate your vote to someone you trust. The other thing about liquid democracy is that you can hand over your vote to different people for different topics. So you could say, I trust that person to vote on my behalf for healthcare related issues, and I trust this other person to vote on my behalf for technological related issues. And you can take back your vote anytime you're like, wait a second, I did have them on technological issues, but there's this one vote coming up that I personally want to vote for. I have a well-informed position and a strong opinion about it, so I take back my vote for this particular vote and I'm going to vote directly. Also, this chain of giving votes can be more than two people. So for example, if you give your vote to someone else, they could give your vote and their vote to a third person. And that third person could pass their votes on up the chain. That's the basic idea with liquid democracy. Now, how does this idea fit in with the context of this channel? On this channel, I'm exploring why the world seems to be unraveling based on manipulation on social media and control by the tech monopolies, and also what we can do about it. Liquid democracy specifically is going to be in the category of what can we do about all these things that seem to be going wrong. As a matter of fact, I'm going to describe liquid democracy as if it were taking over the way the political system in the United States worked, but I don't actually think that's going to be the most likely way that it's used. I think many people are recognizing a need for governance in the online space, governance on social media, and governance of the various tech platforms. So I expect the next 10 years is going to be a time of experimentation with that kind of governance. And I expect that liquid democracy will be used in the social media space. This could allow people to vote on the community rules that govern a place like YouTube. So for example, some issues that you might have in your mind, YouTube right now has to make decisions about how to pay creators, about what kinds of content gets booted from the platform. Pornography, certain political beliefs, disrespectful content, all of that kind of stuff. Also, how do the algorithms work? What kind of content gets promoted in the algorithms? What kind of content gets suppressed in the algorithms, even if it's not officially booted from the platform? So those are really important rules that sort of govern our lives online, and yet they're made by management of companies that are beholden to shareholders. I think there is going to be a growing demand for a more democratically governed version of social media. Now, this is going to be quite difficult to pull off, but I expect a lot of experimentation with this, and liquid democracy could actually be a really good way of playing around with different formats of governing the online space. All right, so I would like to visualize all three systems on the whiteboard, and I'll talk a little bit about the strengths and weaknesses of each system. Here's my depiction of direct democracy, where each dot represents a person, and each person is voting directly on each of the three initiatives that I'm using as examples. Now, ancient Athens actually used direct democracy, so all of the citizens who were eligible to vote, which of course at that time was only men, showed up and could vote in person. Now, what are the drawbacks from direct democracy? Obviously, one of the biggest drawbacks is just the burden on people. You have to research these things ahead of time. You have to show up. Not everybody is going to have that time. As a matter of fact, I've kind of connected most of these dots to each of the issues, but a lot of people are just not even going to bother. A second drawback of direct democracy is tyranny of the majority and mob rule. As a matter of fact, Socrates was executed by what many consider to be a mob of people. That's the general worry about direct democracy, is that crowds of people, when they get together, can really get riled up together. The emotional energy can spread and they can kind of go after people and leave reason behind. And in some ways you could actually separate this, the mob rule version of democracy, which might be a little bit more focused on the sort of emotional spiritual energy in a group, separating that from tyranny of the majority, which might be the fact that people who are in the majority can make laws and legislations that are oppressive toward people in a minority. And both of these things could actually be at play in liquid democracy, which is why I think some of these systems are going to take a while for us to figure out what kinds of checks and balances we need to make them actually work in practice. And I think that practice and that experimentation around systems is going to happen in the social media space. Now, one last risk of this is going to be the fact that the citizens may not be that well informed about all of these issues, especially in the modern day when understanding healthcare and the economics behind healthcare and all of the complex institutions involved in the healthcare system takes a lot of time. If you look at the many different topics that government has to make decisions about, how many can one individual actually keep up with and understand deeply? Maybe it's 2 or 3 or 5 or 10, but it's definitely not all of them. So those are some drawbacks of direct democracy. Now let's look at representative democracy. All right, representative democracy, everybody elects their representatives. In this case, there's 4 on the board. They're in purple, and the representatives are the ones to vote on these things. So the representatives have this as a full-time job. They can do research on these topics as a full-time job if they want. This gets rid of the problem of people having to spend their precious time going in and voting, going in and researching complicated topics. In which case, what are the problems with representative democracy? Well, one of the problems is that the vote on any given topic might be very, very loosely related to the people who are actually voting the representatives in. And there's a lot of reasons for that. For one, if you're voting on someone who's going to be voting on an entire list of topics, you kind of have to prioritize which things you care about. Maybe none of the candidates have your perfect set of values around every single topic that's going to be voted on, so you're sort of forced to prioritize. Meaning some of these topics that are perhaps lower down in the news cycle, that are perhaps more complicated, that people aren't thinking about, they aren't really at play when we're voting in our representatives. So that will loosen people's connection with the actual votes on the real topics. A second problem with representative democracy is if you have lobbyists or people from foreign governments who want to target influence into the system in the United States. You don't have to target the entire population. As a matter of fact, there's a small number of people that you can spend a lot of money trying to change their viewpoint, change their opinion, wine and dine them, socially manipulate them. So it's much easier to capture this smaller set of people if you want to influence policy within the United States. And a third problem of this is kind of related to that, which is the election of these representatives, whether that happens every 2 years, every 6 years, or whatnot. That whole process can be the focus of manipulation. Now, all voting systems can be manipulated. There's problems with all systems. But if you have this sort of concentrated election every 6 years for many topics that are going to change, which you can't necessarily predict, then people who have more inside information, more power, more money, can invest a lot in the election process to elect these representatives. They're very high stakes elections. Now, that's just a quick and dirty overview of representative democracy and some of its weaknesses. Let's look at liquid democracy and how it relates to both of these systems. Under liquid democracy, each person has the right to vote on every single bill, every single topic that comes up. But they also have a right to allocate their vote to whoever they want to vote for them. So on one hand, we could get one person who's treating this exactly like a direct democracy. So this particular person is experiencing the system exactly like a direct democracy. Now we could have another person down here who's experiencing the system exactly like a representative democracy. Let's visualize that. So this person down here has just said, this is the person who's going to vote for me on every single topic. This is what this person's allocation might look like. Now, a third setup is you could pick someone different to vote for you on each different topic. In which case, to some degree, if this person has a lot more votes allocated to them on healthcare than other issues, that's an indication that the population trusts this person about healthcare. And one interesting thing this does, if you think about the representative democracy, it's going to involve a lot of bureaucrats because there are a lot of little decisions that go on with implementing any policy. And who controls those little decisions? Well, it's probably not the elected representatives. It's probably people that they've decided are going to figure out the details in their place. And that's a bureaucrat. A bureaucrat is someone who's not elected, but is sort of in the system, making these minute decisions about implementation. You could potentially identify bureaucrats from among the people who have been identified among the population as knowing a lot about the topic as people selected to be bureaucrats. In which case, you could actually reduce the number of bureaucrats or at least get a closer connection between the people implementing policies and who the population believes has expertise on those topics. Now, I want to give a few downsides to liquid democracy. I mean, the biggest downsides are going to be the tyranny of the majority and the mob rule issues. Here's another thing about liquid democracy that can be troublesome. So we know in all of these voting systems, the voting happens anonymously. Like you have a private vote so that nobody can bully you into voting for something they want and impose consequences on you afterward. The problem, however, with the anonymous vote has to do with the chain of votes if it gets really long. So let's say these 5 people have allocated their healthcare vote to this person. But this person decides that the new healthcare law is complex beyond what they know enough about, so they pass their vote along to someone else. And this person passes their vote along to someone else. This can go on as many votes as you want, right? Any person can give all of their votes to somebody else. The problem here is that the people down here may not know who this person is, or who this person is, or who this person is, since this person is voting anonymously. So you can, to some degree, lose control of your votes as they get passed between people. Sometimes when we're thinking about this, we imagine this person as being transparent with their audience about who they're going to pass their vote along to. But if there's a chain of passing votes, it's easy for one of these people to be non-transparent. And this is also an issue for corruption. If this kind of thing is going on, then there could be corruption behind the scenes where someone kind of schmoozes one of these people who gets a lot of votes, gets their votes allocated to them, and passes them along to somebody else in the chain. Perhaps even someone they're paid to pass it along to. So this can be an issue with liquid democracy. It's just something to keep in mind. So it's a really fun system. It's a creative system. It's something that I think could be implemented in the online world in a way that's more smooth. So if we use some of our tools to try to get this kind of thing going for online platforms, where instead of healthcare, big tech, and economics, it would be how do you pay creators? How do you decide which things belong on platform or off platform? And how do the algorithms work? Then you could experiment with liquid democracy in a really fun way and work out its kinks.